Solitary confinement is one of the worst things a person can go through, and it's estimated that close to 100,000 people are currently in solitary confinement in America, with these people spending 23 hours of their day every single day in prison cells about the size of an elevator for sometimes decades on end. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving you the rundown on the top 10 prisoners who have been left in solitary confinement. Hey everyone, my name is Mackenzie Smith and I'm going to be a guest host for the next few videos on Most Amazing. I'm usually hosting on Inform Overload, so if you want to see more of me or like entertainment news, check us out over there. But in this video, I'm going to be telling you stories of people who were in solitary confinement, their experiences, and how they got out of it, if they were able to. So without further ado, let's get into that list. Starting off at number 10, we have Sam Mendez. Sam Mendez was part of a landmark case decision for minors in solitary confinement that even brought the judge in the case to tears. Mendez was in prison after being convicted of killing a woman at the age of 14, even though no evidence tied him to the crime. At the time he was released, he was in prison for more than 23 years, most of it spent in solitary. He was put in solitary for incredibly small offenses, like making an unpermitted phone call and using a bathroom key when he wasn't supposed to. And literally, I do worse things on the daily. But in 2019, his sentence was reconsidered after a 2016 Supreme Court ruling declared life without parole for minors unconstitutional, which gave him the chance for his case to be reconsidered. After he was released, his mother was incredibly relieved, telling news outlets that the last time she had seen him was in 2004. And unfortunately, he left solitary battling a host of mental illnesses. In at number 9, Albert Woodfox. Albert Woodfox was held in solitary for 44 years in a Louisiana prison before being released in 2016, when he was 69 years old. And after being released, he decided to speak out about the torture he had endured while living in isolation, in a book he wrote called Solidarity: My Story of Transformation and Hope. In the book and many interviews he did after, he spoke of how the hardest day was when he learned he wouldn't be able to attend his mother's funeral. In the book he speaks of the severe bouts of claustrophobia he would endure, saying, quote, "The pain was so intense, it was so deep, I had never felt that kind of pain before. This was different from physical pain. My very soul ached," he said in an interview with The Current. In 1971, age 22, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 50 years in Angola prison, which is known for being one of the hardest prisons in America. Then in 1973, he was sent to Solidarity after being convicted for the murder of a prison guard. But in the book and in the interviews that followed, he maintained his innocence, saying that when the prison guard was found dead, him and another inmate were convicted, despite no physical evidence against them, with Woodfox believing his conviction was because he was a member of the Black Panthers and was trying to fix the prison system while he was inside. Up at number 8, Frank De Palma. Frank De Palma developed agoraphobia while he was in solitary confinement, which is a fear of going outside, and a preference for being locked in his tiny cell. After he was sentenced to prison for grand larceny, battery, second-degree murder, and attempted murder, he was sentenced to solitary when some new and young gang members were brought into the prison in an effort to separate them. And for the last 5 years of his sentence, he never once came out of his cell, saying in an interview that he would cherish the times when he would get to go outside to exercise. But one day he felt intense anxiety about being outside, and it didn't stop until he was back in his cell, saying that eventually just the thought of coming out of his cell for any reason would send him into a panic. And after that he was sent to the psych ward for 10 months because he had developed a serious mental illness, and he still struggles even though he has been released from prison. In at number 7, Steven Slevin. Steven Slevin was thrown in jail in 2005 after he got a DWI, then spent 2 years in solitary confinement. But after his terrible treatment while inside, he was actually awarded $15.5 million in one of the largest prisoner civil rights awards in US history. After Slevin was put in prison, he was almost immediately put in solitary, and there were months where he did not leave. He was given food and medication during these periods but wasn't bathing, resulting in mold forming on his skin and his teeth to rot. Ugh, I'm not gonna lie, I kinda got chills saying that one. Like, how can someone develop mold? Like, that's just so messed up. Then after he was released, he started a case for prisoner rights because of all the atrocities he had faced while inside. His lawyer spoke more about the case, saying they were able to prove that the prison was completely indifferent to the terrible conditions he faced. And with all the evidence they had against the prison, Slevin was awarded $22 million by a jury, but after some appeals it was settled at $15.5 million. In at number 6, Adam Capay. Adam Capay is a First Nations man that was sent to solitary confinement in 2012 after he was charged with killing another inmate. But there were many cries for his release after he was subjected to 4 years in isolation, as well as 24/7 artificial light. with the minister in charge of Ontario prisons stating that back in 2016 he would not release him from solitary as that was the decision for the courts, not a politician. While awaiting trial, Capet served approximately 4.5 years in solitary confinement, and during his isolation, his lawyers argued these conditions constituted cruel and unusual punishment. The courts ended up agreeing, with the judge ruling that the violation of Capet's rights under the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms outweighed the government charges. Capet was then released in January 29, 2019. Halfway through at number 5, Cesar Villa. Cesar Villa spoke about his awful time while in solitary in an essay he wrote back in 2013, while he was in his 12th year of isolation at the Pelican Bay Security Housing Unit, or SHU. Villa was originally placed in solitary indefinitely after being validated as a gang member. In an essay, he wrote how being in the SHU was a cold and empty world, where the emptiness would seep into your bones, saying in the first few weeks he tried to tell himself that he could get through it. But then as the weeks went on, things got worse. He was forced to sit outside in the cold during his time in solitary, and he would stand in his underwear in the yard while he was shivering from the rain and snow coming down on him, saying that at the end of his first year, his feet and hands began to split open from the cold, and that he bled all over his clothes, food, and even in his sheets. Even saying that the facility was so strict, band-aids weren't even allowed, saying that he didn't realize it then, but in hindsight his psyche was unraveling. And oh my god, after hearing that honestly might be the worst one. Oh, that is just crazy. Then in at number 4, Sarah Jo Pender. Even though most people that end up in solitary are men, women are not immune from this treatment. Some are even sent to solitary as a retaliation for them exposing abuse inside the prison from staff. Sarah Jo Pender was sent to prison after being convicted of murder along with her boyfriend, but later was sent to solitary confinement after she escaped from prison in 2008, leading to her being featured on America's Most Wanted. After many years in solitary, she decided to write about her time while there, with her writing about how women would come in sane but would leave completely shut down inside or hurting themselves out of frustration, saying how she witnessed her prison mates making countless attempts on their own lives with items they found around the prison. A book on her escape called Girl Wanted: The Chase for Sarah Pender was released back in 2011, but it was criticized for being pretty inaccurate. In at number 3, Ashley Smith, who unfortunately ended up passing away after she strangled herself in 2007, and a jury ended up deciding the fact that it was not a suicide, but rather a homicide, because of how neglected Smith was. And even more horribly, the prison guards witnessed the horrific event, with some even videotaping it, if you can believe it, because they were ordered to not go inside of her cell if she's still breathing, even though they could pretty clearly see what was gonna happen if they didn't intervene. 2 years later, one of newly elected Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's first acts was to ask Cabinet to implement recommendations arising from the inquest into her treatment, with Smith's mother Coralie writing in the Globe and Mail in 2014 that her daughter's death would not be the last time solitary confinement would put Canadian inmates in harm's way, and that more needed to be done to stop all this. In at number 2, Reddit AMA. To spice up the list a bit, I wanted to include a Reddit AMA, where an anonymous user wrote that they were in solitary for 15 years, and said they would answer questions, with the user revealing that they were in prison because they tried to kill their stepfather, but they were put in solitary because of a gang affiliation, saying that after being released, they were able to lead somewhat of a normal life, with them now being employed as a taxi driver, but that they still struggle with PTSD from the experience and have a tendency to push others away to this day. And if you were wondering what can be done while you're in solitary, they spoke of how they tried to keep their mind active by reading, writing, and listening to the radio. But since they were restricted for the most part while inside, meaning they were only able to read law books and a Bible, then ending off saying that the silence of lockdown is mind-numbing and suffocating, and with the only noises being heard is screaming, crying, or banging on cell doors. It drove them mentally insane. Then at number 1, Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar was locked up after he killed someone as a teenager in a dispute over drugs. A few years after, he was placed in solitary and then sentenced to death after he was convicted of killing 5 other inmates during the Lucasville uprising. He then spent 27 years in solitary confinement in a supermax prison in Ohio, isolated for 23 hours a day in a bathroom-sized room. And in all those years, he was not let outside whatsoever, and his only connection to the outside was a crack in the wall. But he's trying to change the rules in prison, as after a hunger strike in 2011 by him and some other inmates, him and others in the Ohio prison won the right to hug their family members during visits, instead of just seeing them through plexiglass, as well as being able to make phone calls. In light of the current pandemic, Lamar has been asked advice from his friends and family on how to cope with quarantine, with him telling Mother Jones that he's lucky to have a full bookshelf and a desk, but he also takes time to look inside himself by painting and doing yoga and meditations. Okay everyone, well that is all for that list, but one really interesting takeaway from that last story was the idea that what we've experienced in quarantine is literally nothing compared to what these people have gone through with their intense isolation. And even though it's so minor compared to solitary, with how much my mental health struggled during lockdown for just a few months, it's mind-blowing that people can stay in these conditions for decades. Please let me know your thoughts on all this below, and let me know below based on your lockdown experience how long you think you could last in solitary. I'm pretty introverted, so I think I handled lockdown better than a lot of my really extroverted friends, but it was still incredibly hard for me and I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be, you know, in solitary. But before I go, I'm gonna shout out a few comments from Eamon's last video on secrets hidden under the ocean, and yes, I'm stealing hers because I don't have any comments to reply to yet. So Sleepy said, do you know what else is scary in the ocean? Plastic bags, bottles, and trash in the ocean. And you are so right. Like, these other things don't even matter if we don't get the whole situation situated with all the trash that we put in the ocean. It's really insane. And Khadija Ahmed said, that's why I don't leave my home and the land. Yes, there's some really scary stuff in the ocean. The fact that we haven't even discovered most of it, really creepy. Then Jamie said, I've had a phobia of praying mantises. Irrational fear? Yes. Silly? Yes. Honestly, I won't even blame you here. You know, people have their fears for whatever reason. A spider, literally 2 seconds ago before I started filming this, was going down in front of my face. I was typing at my desk, and literally I see this thing. So that's my fear of spiders. It's a little more rational, but I get what you're saying. Alright everyone, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and learning about prisoners who are in solitary. If you like videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe and check us out on Instagram to see more of our faces. And I'll see y'all in the next one.